March 27th, 1959, 3:15 p.m. Ace of Spades. Barbershop, Harlem. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson sits motionless in the chair while the man he trusts most stands 2 steps behind him, trapped inside a choice with no clean escape. The Italian Mafia believes the ending is already written. The paradox. What happens next ends a war without a single gunshot. The answer hides inside a sealed envelope, unseen, unexplained. The Lincoln Continental sits under a broken street lamp. No headlights, no engine hum. Just the tick of cooling metal and the distant scratch of jazz from someone's 3rd-floor window. Little T steps inside because men in tailored suits don't ask twice in Harlem after midnight. Vincent Duca occupies the rear seat like a blade resting in its sheath. Charcoal overcoat. Cufflinks that catch what little light exists. His hands rest folded in his lap fingers, interlaced the way a surgeon's might before an incision. When he speaks, his voice carries the texture of a coroner reading findings. Close the door. Little T does. The interior smells of leather and cologne, applied by men who break kneecaps before lunch and attend opera after dinner. Duca doesn't introduce himself, doesn't offer a handshake. He reaches into his coat and withdraws a manila envelope, places it on the seat between them, with the deliberation of someone positioning a garrote. Open it. Little T's fingers work the clasp. 3 photographs slide out. Black and white. Professional composition. The kind of clarity that holds up in court when prosecutors need juries to see exactly where the bullet entered and how the skull fragmented on exit. The first image shows a fire escape on Lenox Avenue. The second shows a body slumped against a dumpster behind the Monroe Social Club, neck twisted, at the angle that only comes from vertebrae separation, one arm extended toward the alley entrance. The third photograph frames Little T standing 6 feet from that corpse, his profile sharp in the glow from the club's back window, his right hand still gripping the Smith & Wesson that put 2 rounds through the dead man's chest 3 weeks ago. Little T's breathing shifts from steady to controlled. Duca watches him the way a butcher evaluates livestock before selecting which cut to make first. Your shooting was professional. 2 rounds, center mass. The man was dead before his knees unlocked. He pauses, lets the compliment sit like bait. The problem is the witness who took these pictures. What witness? A photographer we employ. He was positioned on the fire escape across the alley. His signed statement currently sits in our attorney's office on Mulberry Street. Dated. Notarized. The negatives are in a safe that would survive the kind of fire that consumes entire neighborhoods. Little T stares at the photographs. The third image shows his face clearly enough for any jury to convict. What do you want? Ellsworth Johnson needs to stop breathing within 5 days. You put a bullet through his skull. Clean work. No witnesses. Once we receive confirmation of his death, the affidavit gets shredded. The negatives get burned. Duca's tone doesn't change. He might be ordering breakfast. Or we deliver everything to the Manhattan District Attorney's office and you spend the next 25 years in Sing Sing. Little T's hands curl into fists. You're blackmailing me into killing Bumpy Johnson. I'm offering you a transaction. Johnson dies. You live free. Johnson lives. You die in a cage. Duca buttons his overcoat. My employer considers this arrangement generous. Who's your employer? Duca's mouth shapes something that resembles a smile the way a straight razor resembles a shaving blade. In New York, asking names is how men end up in the East River with their teeth extracted and their fingerprints burned off. He adjusts his collar. But since you need to understand the stakes, my employer controls the Longshoremen's Union, the Teamsters half the police precincts in Manhattan, and the incinerators where inconvenient evidence turns to ash. Frank Costello's name appears in certain conversations. The name Frank Costello hits Little T like a fist to the solar plexus. Prime Minister of the Underworld. the man who makes judges dismiss cases with a phone call. The architect who transforms street violence into political machinery. Duca opens the door. March cold floods the interior. You have 5 days. We need everything resolved cleanly. He steps onto the sidewalk, walks toward Amsterdam Avenue without looking back. The Lincoln pulls away 30 seconds later. Little T stands on the corner holding 3 photographs that represent a choice between murder and imprisonment. Above him, the 3rd-floor window goes dark. The jazz stops. 12 blocks north, the Shalimar Lounge. 12:34 a.m. The bar runs the length of the east wall, mahogany worn smooth by decades of elbows and spilled whiskey. Smoke hangs in layers thick enough to taste. Marcus Webb sits at the corner booth nursing his 2nd bourbon when Little T walks in. Webb knows the walk, knows the set of the shoulders, knows what it looks like when a man carries weight that wasn't there an hour ago. Little T slides into the booth without greeting. Orders rye. Doesn't touch it when it arrives. Webb waits. Patience is currency in Harlem. They got pictures, Little T says finally. His voice carries the flatness of a man reading his own autopsy report. The Monroe job. Clear enough for court. Webb's hand stops halfway to his glass. Sets it down without drinking. Who's they? Italian. Tailored suit. Talked like a banker. Little T's jaw works. Said Frank Costello's name like I should already know what it means. The name lands on the table between them like a thrown knife. Webb's face doesn't change, but his breathing does. Around them, the bar continues its rhythm. Laughter from the pool table. Billie Holiday on the jukebox. The clink of ice in glasses. None of it registers anymore. Webb picks up his bourbon, drains it, sets the empty glass down with the deliberation of a man placing a period at the end of a sentence. If it's him, the kid already lost before he started choosing. In Harlem, Costello's reputation precedes explanation. The man who built the commission. The diplomat who negotiated peace between the 5 families by making war too expensive to contemplate. The strategist who understands that violence is most effective when it remains theoretical. Little T stares at his untouched rye. They want Bumpy dead in 5 days. Webb says nothing. The silence stretches like a wire pulled taut. At the bar, someone drops a glass. The sound of shattering fills the gap where conversation used to be. When Webb finally speaks, his voice carries the weight of a man delivering a eulogy for someone still breathing. What did you tell them? Nothing. Didn't say yes. Didn't say no. Just took the pictures and walked. Then you're already dead. You just don't know when the funeral is yet. Webb signals for another bourbon. The bartender brings the bottle, pours for both of them without asking, walks away. Frank Costello doesn't make offers, he makes declarations. The conversation you had wasn't negotiation, it was notification. He drinks. 5 days from now, either Bumpy's in the ground or you are, probably both. Little T reaches for his rye. His hand trembles. Not much. Just enough. He pulls back, curls his fingers into a fist. The tremor stops. Webb watches this sequence and understands what it means. Fear is contagious. Little T caught it the moment Duca said Costello's name. Neither man speaks again. There's nothing left to say. When power reaches a certain altitude, conversation becomes ornamental. Costello made his position clear. Little T has 5 days to commit murder or become a corpse. At 1:23 a.m., Little T stands, leaves his rye untouched, walks out into March cold. Webb stays in the booth, finishes both bourbons, orders a third. Somewhere in Harlem, Bumpy Johnson sleeps unaware that one of his soldiers just received execution orders with his name attached. The clock reads T-minus 120 hours. Sleep doesn't come. Little T lies on his back staring at ceiling cracks that look like fracture lines in bone. The radiator hisses. Outside, a truck downshifts on Lennox. Normal sounds. But inside his skull, the Lincoln Continental replays on loop. Vincent Duca's voice, the photographs, Frank Costello's name hanging in the air like cordite after a firing. At 4:15 a.m. he gives up, stands, walks to the kitchenette. The Smith & Wesson sits on the counter where he left it 6 hours ago. He picks it up, checks the cylinder, 6 rounds, spins it, clicks it shut. He raises the revolver, aims at the bathroom mirror. Himself in the crosshairs. Finger on the trigger, not pulling, just feeling the weight. The pressure point where 3 pounds becomes decision. He lowers the gun, raises it again. The mirror shows a man practicing murder. He does this 17 times before the sun starts thinking about rising. By 5:30 a.m. the ritual has evolved. He stands in the doorway, aims at the chair across the room. In his mind, Bumpy Johnson sits there, reading the newspaper, drinking coffee. Unaware. Little T sights down the barrel, calculates the angle. 2 rounds. Center mass. The way Duca described it. Professional. Clean. The fantasy plays out in clinical detail. The chair stays empty. The trigger stays unpulled. At 6:00 a.m. he sits at the kitchen table, pulls out paper, writes in block letters that don't look like his handwriting. Mama, I did what I had to do. Don't ask questions. Don't look for answers. Just know I made the only choice that let me keep breathing. He folds the letter, doesn't seal it, leaves it on the table next to the ashtray that holds 3 cigarettes smoked down to filters that burned his fingers. March 23rd, 1959. 2:00 p.m., same apartment. The phone hasn't rung. Little T has checked it 4 times to make sure it still works. Lifted the receiver, heard the dial tone. Replaced it. The silence is worse than threats would be. Threats you can measure, calculate response, prepare defense. Silence is a different weapon. It works on the imagination, lets fear do the labor that muscle used to do. He understands the method now. Vincent Duca won't call, won't send reminders, won't dispatch soldiers to lean on him or follow him or demonstrate what happens to men who hesitate. The Italians already made their position clear. The photographs exist. The deadline exists. The consequence of inaction exists. Everything else is Little T's problem to solve. This is how real power operates. It makes one move, then sits back and watches the target destroy himself. The truly dangerous men don't need to repeat their threats. They say it once. Let it germinate. Let the target water it with his own fear until it grows into action. March 23rd, 1959. 8:00 p.m. Bumpy Johnson's office above the Red Rooster Club. Gordon Hayes stands in front of the desk with his hat in his hands. The news he carries doesn't fit the usual categories. Not a territorial dispute, not a shipment problem. Something else. Something that smells like outside interference. Bumpy sits behind mahogany that survived Prohibition and the Depression and every gang war since. The desk is clean. Just a telephone, an ashtray, a glass of Barolo from a vintage that predates most of the soldiers working for him. He doesn't look up when Gordon enters, finishes reading the racing form, folds it precisely, sets it aside. Only then does he acknowledge Gordon's presence with a gesture that means speak. Little T met with someone last night. Late, West 145th. Got into a Lincoln Continental black, no plates visible. Sat inside for 11 minutes. Walked out looking like a man who just watched his own funeral. Bumpy's expression doesn't change. He lifts the Barolo, examines the color against the desk lamp. Ruby moving toward garnet. Description of who he met. White, 45 to 50. Expensive suit. Moved like a man who doesn't worry about being followed. Not our usual problem. Not the kind who shout in the street or wave guns around. The kind who make appointments. Bumpy sets the glass down without drinking. His fingers drum once on the desk. The sound is soft but carries weight. They used his past. Gordon blinks. Sir. Whoever approached Little T brought leverage, something concrete, something that makes killing me look preferable to refusing. Bumpy stands, walks to the window, looks down at Lenox Avenue. Friday night traffic. Taxicabs and delivery trucks and people moving through their lives, unaware that 3 floors above them a calculation is taking place. They're not stupid enough to threaten him with violence. Violence he understands. Violence he can fight. They threatened him with consequence, with exposure, with the machinery of law turning him into an example. Gordon stays silent. Bumpy continues. This isn't a war. Wars involve bullets and territories changing hands. This is surgery. Someone is trying to remove me using precision instead of force. He turns from the window. His face shows nothing but his jaw sets like concrete curing. They built a trap using Little T's loyalty as the spring mechanism. Elegant, efficient, the work of someone who thinks in systems instead of violence. He returns to the desk. Sits. Picks up the Barolo. This time he drinks. Get me Jerome Parker, the coroner's assistant at Harlem Hospital. Tell him I need a conversation. Private. Tonight, if possible. Gordon nods, starts to leave. Bumpy's voice stops him. And Gordon, Little T doesn't know you're watching him. Keep it that way. March 24th, 1959, 11:00 p.m., Harlem Hospital morgue basement. Gordon Hayes moves through the corridor like smoke. No clipboard, no white coat. Just a janitor's coveralls and a key that opens doors it shouldn't. The morgue operates on skeleton crew after 9. 1 attendant upstairs. 1 security guard who takes his dinner break at 10:30 and stretches it to 45 minutes. He finds the filing cabinet in the records room. 3rd drawer. Monroe Social Club Incident, March 2nd, 1959. The folder is thin. Crime scene photographs, preliminary autopsy notes. Witness statement from 1 Jerome Parker morgue assistant who happened to be walking past the alley at 11:43 p.m. and saw the whole transaction. Saw the shooter. Saw the weapon. Saw enough to put a man in Sing Sing for 25 years. Gordon photographs each page with a Minox camera, small enough to hide in a closed fist. The shutter sounds like a fingernail tapping glass. He finishes, returns the folder, exits through the service entrance where nobody asks questions about janitors working late. By midnight, he's back at the Red Rooster. Bumpy sits at the desk reading a first edition Langston Hughes. He closes the book, accepts the film canister Gordon places in front of him. Jerome Parker, Gordon says, 28 years old, works morgue night shift, lives alone on 140th. His mother's in a nursing home in the Bronx, expensive facility, the kind that requires monthly payments he shouldn't afford on a morgue assistant's salary. Bumpy holds the film up to the lamp, studies the negatives. Someone's paying for the mother's care. Would be my guess. Find out where Jerome goes to pray. March 25, 1959. 6:15 a.m. St. Tuams, Phillips Episcopal Church, 134th Street. The chapel is empty except for 2 men. Jerome Parker kneels in the 3rd pew from the altar. Bumpy Johnson sits in the pew directly behind him. Neither man announced his arrival, but Jerome's shoulders went rigid the moment he heard the footsteps approach. Morning light filters through stained glass, red and blue and gold falling across stone floors that smell like incense and candle wax and the particular cold that churches hold even in summer. Bumpy waits. Patience is a weapon sharper than any blade. Finally, Jerome stops praying, sits back, doesn't turn around. I wondered when you'd find me. Wondering is different from preparing. Bumpy's voice is quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you lean in. If you were prepared, You wouldn't be here alone. Jerome's jaw works. He stares at the altar where morning light catches the brass cross. What do you want? I want to understand the transaction. Frank Costello's people approached you, offered money for your mother's care. All you had to do was sign a statement about what you saw in the alley behind the Monroe Social Club on March 2nd. Jerome doesn't respond. The silence is confirmation enough. They're paying for silence, Bumpy continues. Monthly deposits that cover the nursing home, as long as you maintain the story. He pauses. I'm offering something different. A plane ticket, $5,000 cash. A contact in Los Angeles who runs a funeral home and needs an assistant. Your mother gets transferred to a facility in California. Better care. Ocean view. You start over somewhere the Italians don't have filing cabinets full of leverage. Jerome turns, looks at Bumpy for the first time. Why? Because Costello bought your silence. I'm buying your absence. One removes the testimony from court. The other removes the witness from the continent. And if I say no? Bumpy's expression doesn't change, but something shifts in the air. Then you continue receiving monthly payments until the Italians decide your usefulness has expired. Men like Costello don't keep witnesses alive longer than necessary. He stands. You have 48 hours to decide. He walks toward the door. Jerome watches him go. Doesn't call out. Just sits in the third pew while morning light continues falling through stained glass. March 25th, 1959. 9:00 a.m., Red Rooster Club. Gordon stands at the window, turns when Bumpy enters. Parker agree. He will. Fear is immediate. Hope requires cultivation. Bumpy removes his coat. I gave him 48 hours to let hope take root. And Little T. Little T continues believing he has two choices. Bumpy sits at the desk, opens the racing form. I'm not ready to show him the third option yet. Gordon's brow furrows. Why not? If Parker disappears, the Italians lose their leverage. I don't need to know if fear makes him loyal. Fear makes everyone loyal until better fear comes along. Bumpy looks at Gordon. I need to know what he chooses when the cage door opens and nobody's watching. When he's truly free to walk away or stay. Gordon Hayes returns to the filing cabinet. Same coveralls, same key, same corridor that smells like formaldehyde and institutional disinfectant. The security guard is on his break. The attendant upstairs is reading a magazine behind a desk that faces away from the stairwell. Gordon has 12 minutes to complete work that requires precision over speed. He opens the third drawer, locates the Monroe Social Club file, removes Jerome Parker's witness statement, removes the crime scene photographs, removes the preliminary autopsy notes that reference estimated time of incident and caliber of weapon used. The folder goes from thin to non-existent. He replaces it in the drawer exactly where it lived, closes the cabinet, locks it. The click sounds like a bolt sliding home in a rifle chamber. By 2:47 a.m., he's at the district attorney's satellite office on 125th Street. The building operates on night security that consists of one retired patrolman who takes his rounds at precise intervals because precision is what separates careers from pensions. Gordon watches from across the street, times the pattern, waits for the guard to disappear into the west stairwell, crosses, enters through the service entrance using a key that cost $500 and came from a locksmith who asks no questions because questions reduce repeat business. The records room is on the third floor, filing cabinets arranged alphabetically. March incidents under M. Monroe Social Club. The duplicate file sits exactly where institutional procedure dictates it should. Gordon removes the affidavit, the photographs, the coroner's preliminary findings, slides them into the leather satchel he carries, leaves the folder empty, but present. Empty folders raise fewer immediate alarms than missing folders. Bureaucracies notice absence slower than they notice modification. He exits the same way he entered. By 3:30 a.m., he's back at the Red Rooster. Bumpy sits at his desk. Doesn't look up when Gordon enters, just extends his hand. Gordon places the satchel in it. Bumpy opens the clasp, removes the documents, studies them the way a chess player studies an opponent's opening moves. After 2 minutes, he sets them aside, opens the desk drawer, retrieves a metal waste bin, strikes a match, drops it into the bin, feeds the documents 1 page at a time. The paper curls, blackens, turns to ash that smells like gasoline and closure. Jerome Parker boards a plane to Los Angeles tomorrow at noon, Gordon says. His mother gets transferred to the facility in Santa Monica on Friday. I gave him the cash this afternoon. He didn't ask questions. Smart man. Bumpy watches the last page burn. The Italians will notice his absence within 72 hours. By then, the trail will be cold, and Parker will be establishing residency in a state where New York subpoenas carry reduced weight. Gordon shifts his weight. The photographs Vincent Duca showed Little T. Those still exist, in the Lincoln, in whatever safe the Italians use for insurance. Bumpy's mouth shapes something that isn't quite a smile. Insurance only works if the policy remains valid. Without Jerome Parker's testimony, the photographs become interesting art instead of admissible evidence. He stands, walks to the window, looks down at Harlem sleeping through hours that belong to people who work legitimate jobs and keep legitimate schedules. But you're right. The Italians don't know their leverage just evaporated. They still think they're holding a winning hand. We could tell Little T end this now. No. Bumpy's voice carries the finality of a vault door closing. Little T needs to arrive at the decision himself, needs to stand in front of me with the gun and the choice and the weight of what happens next. He turns from the window. Otherwise, he never learns that loyalty isn't transaction. It's principle that survives even when fear says run. March 26, 1959. 11:00 p.m., West 145th Street. The Lincoln Continental sits in the same spot it occupied 4 nights ago. Same broken street lamp, same absence of traffic, same sense that the neighborhood has learned to look away when expensive cars park in places they shouldn't. Vincent Duca isn't inside. Won't be for another 6 hours. The Italians operate on schedules that reflect confidence. They don't expect interference. Don't anticipate that their trap has already been dismantled from the inside. Gordon approaches from the alley, moves along the building line where shadows pool thick enough to hide a man who knows how to use them. He reaches the Lincoln, tests the door. Locked. Removes a Slim Jim from his coat, works the mechanism with the efficiency of someone who has done this enough times that muscle memory handles the complexity. The lock surrenders. He opens the door, slides into the rear seat where Little T sat 4 nights ago, receiving ultimatums that felt like gravity. The manila envelope rests in the glove compartment. Same envelope, same weight. Gordon opens it. 3 photographs slide out. Little T standing over a body, the evidence that turned loyalty into hostage situation. He removes the photographs, replaces them with 3 sheets of blank paper cut to identical dimensions, adds 2 paper clips to match the weight, returns the envelope to the glove compartment, closes it, exits the vehicle, locks the door, walks back into the alley where Harlem swallows him like water accepting a stone. The switch took 90 seconds. The Italians won't discover it until they need to use the photographs. By then, the timeline will have advanced past the point where correction becomes possible. Vincent Duca will open the envelope in front of witnesses or prosecutors or whoever needs to see proof that Little T committed murder. He'll find blank paper. By the time he understands what happened, Jerome Parker will be 3,000 miles west, and the legal foundation of the blackmail will have turned to smoke. March 27th, 1959, 9:00 a.m., Ace of Spades barbershop. Bumpy Johnson sits in the chair at his usual time. Same barber, same radio playing Coltrane, same rhythm he's maintained for 3 years because patterns create predictability, and predictability creates opportunity for those who think violence solves problems that negotiation could handle better. He doesn't increase security, doesn't change his schedule, doesn't give any indication that he knows a soldier in his organization received orders to put a bullet through his skull. The barber works the razor, hot towel, lather. The blade moves across Bumpy's jaw with the precision of a surgeon closing an incision. Outside the window, Harlem moves through Thursday morning. Delivery trucks, pedestrians. The perpetual motion of a neighborhood that doesn't stop breathing, just because quiet wars happen in barbershops and back rooms and parked Lincolns. Gordon stands near the door, watches the street. His hand rests inside his coat where a .38 caliber revolver waits for circumstances that probably won't arrive but might. Bumpy catches his eye in the mirror, shakes his head once. The gesture means, stand down. Gordon's hand moves away from the gun, returns to his side. The barber finishes, wipes the blade, removes the cape. Bumpy stands, pays, tips the same amount he always tips because deviation from pattern signals awareness and awareness signals fear, and fear is what the Italians want to cultivate. He walks to the door, steps onto the sidewalk. The sun hits his face, March warming toward spring. The city smells like exhaust and hot dogs, and the particular optimism that comes from winter finally loosening its grip. Nobody shoots him. Nobody approaches with demands or threats or manila envelopes. Vincent Duca doesn't appear. Little T doesn't materialize with a gun and a choice that's already been made. The moment passes. Bumpy walks toward his car. Gordon follows. They drive back to the Red Rooster in silence that feels like the pause between lightning and thunder. Inside the office, Bumpy removes his coat, hangs it on the stand, sits at the desk, opens the racing form, studies the odds at Belmont. Outside the window, Harlem continues its Thursday rhythms, unaware that somewhere in this neighborhood a trap just collapsed under its own weight. Unaware that Frank Costello's leverage turned to blank paper while his organization continued believing they controlled the outcome. Gordon stands at the window. Little T has 24 hours left on the deadline. He does. Bumpy marks a horse in the fourth race, and in 24 hours he'll make his choice. Either he shows up with a gun, or he shows up with questions. Either way, I'll know if loyalty survived the test. March 27, 1959. 3:15 p.m. Ace of Spades, barbershop. Bumpy Johnson sits motionless in the chair. The barber works the straight razor across his jaw with strokes that sound like silk tearing. Hot towel. Lather. The blade catching afternoon light that comes through the window at an angle that makes everything look like it's happening underwater. On the radio, Coltrane works through Blue Train with the kind of intensity that doesn't leave room for conversation. Little T stands 2 steps behind the chair. His right hand rests inside his coat where the Smith & Wesson waits in a shoulder holster. His breathing is controlled. His palm is dry. 5 days of rehearsal distilled into this moment where geometry becomes decision and decision becomes action that can't be undone. The barber finishes the left side of Bumpy's face, moves to the right. The razor makes another pass, creates windows where a man could draw a weapon and fire twice before anyone registered what was happening. Little T's fingers curl around the grip. The metal is warm from body heat. His index finger finds the trigger. 3 pounds of pressure. That's all that separates this moment from the next. Bumpy's eyes meet Little T's in the mirror. No surprise, no fear. Just acknowledgement that the situation has arrived at the coordinates everyone knew it would reach. He doesn't speak, doesn't move. Just maintains eye contact while the barber continues working, and Coltrane continues building toward a solo that sounds like a man arguing with God. Little T's hand tightens on the grip. The gun shifts inside the coat. Bumpy watches this in the mirror. His expression doesn't change. The moment stretches. Little T's hand trembles. Not much. Just enough. He releases the grip. His hand emerges from the coat empty, hangs at his side like a question that couldn't find its answer. The barber finishes, wipes Bumpy's face, removes the cape. Bumpy stands, reaches into his pocket, removes an envelope, places it on the counter. Read it outside. Little T picks up the envelope, opens it. Inside is a single sheet of paper. Typed. No signature. Jerome Parker departed New York on March 26 aboard TWA Flight 603 to Los Angeles. His witness statement removed from District Attorney files March 26. Photographs in Vincent Duca's possession, replaced with blank paper, March 26. Legal basis for blackmail terminated 72 hours before deadline. Little T reads it twice. The words don't change. He was free 3 days ago. Free before he stood in his apartment practicing murder. Free before he walked into this barbershop with a loaded weapon and 5 days of fear compressed into 2 steps and 3 pounds of trigger pressure. He looks up. Bumpy stands at the door. Little T follows him outside. The sidewalk is empty. Bumpy turns. His face shows nothing but his eyes carry weight. "You knew," Little T says. "I knew the trap. Dismantled it. Let you walk into the appointment anyway." Bumpy's hands rest at his sides. "You had 72 hours to choose without pressure. No Italians watching. No photographs waiting. No consequences except the ones you invented." Little T's jaw works. Why? Because loyalty under duress tells me nothing. Loyalty when the cage door opens tells me everything. Bumpy steps closer. "You walked in here with a gun, with 5 days of rehearsal, with every reason to believe killing me was your only survival option, and you didn't pull the trigger. The photographs were already gone. You didn't know that until 30 seconds ago. You chose before you knew you were free. That's what matters." Little T stares at the envelope. What happens now? "Now you leave Harlem." Bumpy removes a second envelope from his coat, hands it to Little T. $500. Bus ticket to Philadelphia. Contact information for a man who runs numbers in North Philly. He'll give you work if you want it." He pauses. "You're free to go. Free to stay. Free to make whatever choice you want. And my position here. Gone." The word lands like a gavel. "You kept your life. Lost your rank. I don't kill men for considering murder when they believe survival depends on it, but I don't keep them in positions where trust determines whether operations succeed or collapse." Little T stands holding 2 envelopes. One contains the past erased. The other contains a future he didn't ask for. Bumpy gets in his car. Gordon drives. They disappear into traffic. Little T walks toward his apartment. The Smith & Wesson still rests in the shoulder holster. Still loaded, but the weight feels different now, heavier, like carrying evidence of a crime that almost happened but didn't. T-0. The deadline expired. Nobody got shot. The Italians lost leverage they don't know they lost yet. Little T kept breathing, but lost everything else that mattered. The story spreads the way stories do in neighborhoods where information moves faster than newspapers can print it. At the Shalimar Lounge, Marcus Webb tells it one way. Little T walked into the barbershop armed, walked out unemployed. Bumpy never flinched. At the corner store on 135th, the version includes dramatic embellishment, guns drawn, standoff. By noon, the details have multiplied like cells dividing. But underneath the variations, the core remains consistent. Someone tried to leverage Bumpy Johnson using blackmail. Tried to turn one of his soldiers into an assassin by threatening prison time and producing photographs. The leverage evaporated. The photographs turned to blank paper. The witness disappeared into a different time zone. At the Red Rooster, 2 men discuss it over bourbon. "Heard the Italians had him dead to rights," one says. "Had pictures, had testimony, had everything wrapped tight." "Had nothing," the other responds. By the time they realized it, their whole operation was gone. The first man drains his glass. Blackmail doesn't work when the target dismantles your leverage before you know it's gone. March 28, 1959. 2:00 p.m., Midtown Manhattan, office overlooking the Chrysler Building. Frank Costello sits behind a desk made from wood that predates the American Revolution. The office is quiet, tasteful, decorated with the restraint that comes from having nothing left to prove. Vincent Duca stands in front of the desk holding a manila envelope that weighs almost nothing and contains even less. Costello doesn't open it, doesn't need to. Duca already explained the contents. 3 sheets of blank paper where photographs used to be. A witness who boarded a plane to California 72 hours before the deadline expired. An operation that moved from certain victory to complete failure without anyone noticing the transition. Jerome Parker took Johnson's offer. Costello says, his voice is calm. The kind of calm that precedes decisions involving blowtorches and shallow graves. He did. Duca's expression doesn't change. We should have moved faster, should have secured Parker before Johnson identified the vulnerability. Costello leans back in his chair. The leather creaks. Outside the window, Manhattan continues its Friday rhythm. Johnson didn't just identify the vulnerability. He rebuilt the entire structure while we were still admiring our own trap. He pauses, studies Duca the way a jeweler studies a flawed stone. Harlem isn't our territory. The words hang in the air like smoke from a gun that just fired. The operation is over. The expansion into Harlem is canceled. Costello doesn't elaborate. In his vocabulary, admitting defeat is how you avoid larger defeats later. What about Little T? Duca asks. Little T is Johnson's problem now, not ours. Costello stands, walks to the window. We attempted to remove Johnson using precision instead of force. Johnson demonstrated that precision works both directions. We accept the outcome and redirect resources elsewhere. March 28, 1959. 8:00 p.m., Red Rooster Club, Bumpy's office. Gordon stands at the window watching Lenox Avenue transition from day to night. The street lamps flicker on, the neon signs ignite. Little T's on the bus to Philadelphia, left at 6. Good. Bumpy sits at his desk. The racing form is folded. The Barolo is half empty. He made the right choice. The Italians will figure it out eventually, when they open that envelope. Let them figure it out. Bumpy lifts his glass, studies the wine against the lamplight. By then the story will be everywhere. Every soldier in every organization will know that blackmail failed, that photographs can be replaced, that witnesses can be relocated. Gordon turns from the window. You think this ends it, the Italians trying to move into Harlem? I think it demonstrates a principle. Bumpy drinks, sets the glass down with the precision of a period ending a sentence. Power doesn't come from making people betray each other. It comes from making betrayal meaningless. The Italians tried to turn Little T into a weapon. I turned their weapon into an example of why their methodology doesn't work here. Outside the window, Harlem continues its Friday night rhythms. Music from the club below. Laughter. The bass line from a quartet working through a set. Normal sounds. But underneath the normal rhythm, something has changed. A message has been sent. A war has been won without a single bullet fired. Bumpy returns to the racing form. Marks a horse in the 3rd race at Belmont, 4-1 odds. He understands power the same way he understands betting. It's not about the size of your army or the reach of your influence. It's about making your opponent's weapons irrelevant before they realize they're fighting a war they've already lost. The Barolo bottle sits on the desk, nearly empty. A 1934 vintage that survived a quarter century to be drunk on a Friday night, while Harlem celebrates a victory it doesn't fully understand yet. Bumpy finishes his glass, picks up the Langston Hughes, continues reading about dreams that don't dry up because some men understand that preservation requires making sure nobody can take what you built even when they think they hold all the leverage. The principle Bumpy Johnson demonstrated in that barbershop transcends organized crime. When someone holds leverage over you, whether it's a bad boss threatening your job, a competitor using your past against you, or fear itself paralyzing your decisions, the solution isn't confrontation. It's dismantling the foundation of their power before they realize what you're doing. Remove the witness, replace the photographs, eliminate what makes their threat credible, then watch them discover they've been holding blank paper all along. Ask yourself this: what leverage are you allowing others to hold over you right now? What fear are you feeding that's already lost its teeth? This story examines strategic thinking within historical organized crime contexts for educational purposes only. We don't endorse illegal activity. We study how power operates when conventional rules don't apply. Thank you for staying until the end. If this analysis resonated with you, subscribe for more untold stories where intelligence defeats force. Next time, we examine how Bumpy Johnson built an empire using one principle most men never learn. See you there.